7:02 in the morning, a desperate call to 911. A woman crying, begging for help for a child who had lost consciousness suddenly. But three details in this story made no sense. First, why would someone search how to get rid of bruises 5 times on Google one day before? Second, why would that same person delete 2 of those searches? And third, the most disturbing of all, why, when left alone in an interrogation room, did this woman say out loud, "I'm going to prison for the rest of my life," before even being accused of anything? This is the true story of Hannah Wessey, a 3-year-old girl who won impossible battles from birth, but couldn't win the last one. A story involving lies, family secrets, shocking medical evidence, and a confession that changed everything. But be careful. Not everything is what it seems. Until the final minutes of this case, you'll question who is really telling the truth. Prepare yourself for a journey that goes from a neonatal hospital to a courtroom, passing through an investigation that revealed details no one expected. And, in the end, you'll understand why this case forever changed child protection laws in Ohio. If you're not subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now. This is just the beginning of a story that will leave you speechless. To fully understand this tragedy, we must go back to the beginning. A beginning that already started as a fight for survival. Hannah Jade Wessey came into the world on January 11th, 2015, but her first cry wasn't one of joy or relief. It was a scream of pure pain. Her mother, Adrienne Elam, was trapped in the devastating cycle of heroin addiction, and little Hannah was born already facing a battle she didn't even know existed. Imagine this, a newborn baby who was already going through withdrawal. For 92 consecutive days, little Hannah spent her existence in a neonatal intensive care unit, fighting for every breath she took. Doctors slowly weaned her off methadone, watching helplessly as her tiny body trembled with drug withdrawal she had never chosen to experience. But Hannah was a true fighter from birth. She survived where many babies couldn't have. When she finally left the hospital at 3 months old, she was a born survivor. However, her mother Adrienne was trapped in a destructive cycle of addiction and legal problems that made it impossible to care for a newborn who needed constant attention. Jason, Wes, Hannah's father, was a man determined to break this cycle of destruction. He already had 2 older daughters, Rachel and Caitlin, from previous relationships, and knew exactly what it meant to be responsible for a small and precious life. Now, tiny Hannah became the 3rd treasure of his life, and he was willing to make any necessary sacrifice to protect her. When Hannah was only 4 months old, life turned into a complete nightmare. Jason lost both his job and his home in a devastating period, forcing him into a brutal reality, sleeping in his own car while little Hannah stayed at his brother Jeremy's house. For almost 2 full years they lived this nomadic existence, moving from one temporary place to another, fighting just to survive each day. During this period, Jason worked any job he could find, always with Hannah in mind. He knew his daughter deserved stability, deserved a real home where she could grow and develop like any normal child. This single father's determination was unshakable, even in the darkest moments. Finally, in 2017, luck began to smile on them. Jason got a stable job and was able to rent a modest house on Shank Road in Hamilton, Ohio. For the first time in her young life, Hannah, now 2.5 years old, had a real home. A place where she could leave her toys, scattered, where she had her own bed, where she could finally feel safe. The transformation in Hannah was immediate and remarkable. The little girl became incredibly outgoing and social. She wasn't shy at all, as her father proudly described her to anyone who would listen. The girl always wanted to help other people, especially other children, and simply loved everyone around her with a purity that only children can demonstrate. She had an absolutely contagious smile and a crystal-clear laugh that could literally brighten any environment where she was. Hannah was obsessed with Minnie Mouse, her favorite cartoon character. She could spend entire hours playing with her, mini toys, singing songs she knew by heart, and organizing elaborate imaginary tea parties where she served invisible cookies to her stuffed guests. Her favorite food was hot dogs. But she had a very specific requirement. She always asked Daddy to make them with ketchup, but not too much, a phrase Jason would treasure in his heart forever. This was a completely normal and radiant 3-year-old child who found joy in life's simplest things. She loved laughing until she was breathless, giving tight hugs that lasted longer than necessary, and had that natural curiosity that makes children ask why about absolutely everything. Every Sunday without fail, Grandpa Barry West made his weekly visit. Despite all the chaos and instability they had faced, the grandfather adored his granddaughter with touching devotion. These Sunday visits were sacred to Hannah. She would run to him with arms completely open, animatedly tell him about everything that had happened during the week, proudly show her newest toys, and improvise performances of her favorite songs. Grandpa Barry would later be the person who first noticed subtle but worrying changes in Hannah's behavior. Small alterations that should have served as red alarm signals about the deadly danger that was silently approaching. Now, established in his new life, Jason faced a practical but crucial dilemma. Who would take care of Hannah during the long hours he needed to work? It was an impossible situation. He absolutely needed to earn money to support his family, but at the same time, he couldn't even dream of leaving his precious daughter alone, or with someone he didn't completely trust. It was exactly at this moment that fate seemed to intervene, leading him to meet a family that lived just 300 feet from his house on Shank Road. Lindsay Parton lived there with her partner Timothy Smith and her 2 daughters. At first sight, and by all superficial appearances, Lindsay seemed to be the perfect solution, almost heaven sent for Jason's dilemma. Lindsay was 36 years old and possessed academic training in child development, credentials that impressed and reassured Jason. She was actively involved in her local church, which suggested solid values and trustworthy character. Most importantly, a background check revealed that she had no criminal record, not even minor infractions. Physically, Lindsay was a small and apparently harmless woman, standing only 4 feet 11 inches tall with straight blonde hair that she always kept well arranged. She was an apparently hard-working person, juggling several different jobs. She cared for children in her home, worked as a bookkeeper for her father's business, and still had time to be a Mary Kay consultant, selling cosmetics to women in the neighborhood. Timothy, her partner, owned a well-established civil construction company in the region. When he met Jason, he immediately offered him a job at the company, which simultaneously solved 2 problems. Jason would have stable and well-paid work, and they would have a legitimate reason to help the family. Meanwhile, Lindsay spontaneously offered to take care of Hannah during work hours. At first, absolutely everything seemed to work like a dream come true. Lindsay even showed genuine affection for the situation, posting adorable photos on social media with loving captions like "Welcome, sweet Hannah" and "Our new little friend." To any outside observer, it seemed like a win-win situation for everyone. The care arrangement officially began in July 2017, establishing a routine that seemed perfect for everyone involved. Hannah would spend Monday through Friday at Lindsay's house, sometimes staying there for up to 12 consecutive hours while Jason worked long days in civil construction. The cost was reasonable, between $30 and $35 per day, an amount Jason could afford without great difficulty. For a little girl who had already faced so much in her few years of life, it finally seemed she had found not only stability, but also a safe and loving environment where she could flourish and develop normally. But beneath this apparently perfect facade, something much more sinister was slowly growing. Lindsay was finding it increasingly difficult to manage the additional responsibility that Hannah represented. She already had her own 2 daughters to raise, plus other children who occasionally stayed at her house. To complicate the situation even more, Jason frequently delayed payments due to his own financial difficulties, creating additional tension. At the end of February 2018, Lindsay suffered a devastating miscarriage, a traumatic event that added an extra layer of emotional stress to a situation that was already becoming unsustainable. The loss of the pregnancy left Lindsay emotionally vulnerable and less capable of handling the normal demands of caring for several small children simultaneously. From July 2017 to March 2018, Hannah's life revolved around an apparently simple and comforting routine. Every morning, punctually at 7 o'clock, Daddy Jason would carefully take her to Lindsay's house, always, making sure she had everything she needed for the day. In the evening, after a long day of physical work, he would pick her up and they would return home together. During these months, Hannah formed genuine friendships with Lindsay's daughters and with other children who frequented the house. She became known as the child who brought light and joy to the Parton home, always laughing, always playing, always spreading her contagious positive energy. At least at first, her presence was welcome and appreciated by everyone. But something fundamental began to gradually change in the house's dynamic. Lindsay was becoming progressively more irritated and impatient with Hannah's completely normal mischief. The tolerance she once had for typical 3-year-old behaviors was rapidly depleting. The breaking point came one day when Hannah, acting like any curious child her age, spilled ketchup in the house's toilet. For a child, this probably seemed like an interesting experience, seeing how the red ketchup mixed with the water. But for Lindsay, whose nerves were already fragile from multiple stresses, this became the famous last straw. It was exactly at this moment that, as she would later confess in graphic detail to police during interrogation, she first struck Hannah on the head. This was the beginning of a pattern of behavior that would become progressively more dangerous and violent. Hannah was simply a normal 3-year-old child, doing things that all 3-year-olds do. Sometimes she threw tantrums when Daddy went to work, a completely natural reaction for a child who had experienced so much instability in her short life. She was naturally curious about the world around her, and sometimes got into small troubles, exactly like all children her age do as a normal part of their development. But for Hannah, these completely normal childhood behaviors were becoming increasingly dangerous. Every innocent mischief, every moment of natural curiosity, every normal expression of emotion was being met with an increasingly violent and disproportionate response. Hannah's grandfather, Dave Lame, who religiously maintained his Sunday visits, began to notice something disturbing, bruises appearing regularly on his granddaughter's body. When he gently asked Hannah what had happened, trying to understand how such a small child was getting hurt so frequently, the little girl would simply respond with one word: babies. This enigmatic response now echoes like a desperate cry for help that no one at the time could interpret correctly. A 3-year-old child trying to explain something terrible that was happening to her, but without having the words or understanding to clearly communicate the danger she was in. As March 2018 approached, Lindsay Parton's patience was completely at its limit. The combination of multiple stressful factors had created an emotional time bomb ready to explode. She had suffered a traumatic miscarriage just a few weeks before, was facing significant financial pressures, and felt completely overwhelmed by the responsibility of caring for several small children simultaneously. Hannah, with her naturally energetic personality and completely normal childhood mischief, unfortunately became the focal target of all this accumulated frustration. Every loud laugh, every repetitive question, every small mess that Hannah made as a normal part of being a child was being interpreted through the filter of Lindsay's growing irritation. On March 6th, Hannah fell while playing outside the house, resulting in visible bruises on her face. The next day, March 7th, she fell from a toy train at Lindsay's house, adding even more contusions to her small body. To any casual observer, these seemed like normal childhood accidents. Children fall and get hurt all the time. But something much more sinister was happening during those same days, something Lindsay was desperately trying to hide from everyone around her. On March 7th, exactly the same day Hannah fell from the toy train, Lindsay did something that would later prove incriminating. She secretly searched Google multiple times about how to get rid of bruises. This wasn't a casual or accidental search. Lindsay made these specific searches 5 separate times during a single day, demonstrating growing and obsessive concern with the topic. Even more revealing, she deliberately deleted 2 of these searches from her browsing history, in a clear attempt to cover up evidence of her actions. Why would someone do this? The terrible answer is that the bruises on Hannah's body weren't all results of accidental falls. Some of them were being caused intentionally, and Lindsay was looking for ways to make them disappear before someone asked uncomfortable questions. The fateful morning of March 8th, 2018 began, exactly like hundreds of other mornings before it. Jason carefully prepared Hannah for another day, following the established routine that had become second nature to them. At 6:52 minutes, as he always did, he sent a text message to Lindsay warning her that he was on his way with Hannah. That particular morning, Hannah was in an especially good mood. She wanted to sit in the back seat of the car, something she normally didn't do, and was being exceptionally affectionate with her father. Repeatedly, she asked for "one more kiss, Daddy, one more kiss," before they separated for the day. This behavior was unusual for Hannah, and Jason would later torture himself mentally, repeatedly wondering if his precious daughter had somehow sensed that this would be the last conversation they would ever have. Would it be possible for a 3-year-old child to have some primitive instinct about the danger that awaited her? At exactly 6:55 minutes, Jason carefully brought Hannah, wrapped in her favorite blanket, to Lindsay's house garage. They had a casual conversation about the snow that had fallen during the night and about the medicinal vapor Lindsay was using to treat the visible bruises on Hannah's face. "It seems to be helping," Lindsay observed, feigning concern while examining the girl's face. Jason, completely trusting the woman who had cared for his daughter for months, agreed with the assessment and said goodbye to go to work. He had absolutely no suspicion that he would never see his daughter alive again. What happened in the following minutes continues to be the subject of legal and medical debate. But the physical evidence tells an absolutely terrible and incontestable story. Hannah entered the house with Lindsay, asked for a donut for breakfast, and expressed the desire to sit comfortably on the couch to eat. It was exactly at this moment that, according to the detailed confession Lindsay would later provide to police, the little girl began to show emotional distress because she didn't want her daddy to go to work. For Hannah, who had experienced so much instability in her life, the daily separation was still difficult to accept. But instead of comforting the child or helping her process these normal emotions, Lindsay completely lost control of her own repressed emotions. She grabbed Hannah, who weighed only 33 pounds and was defenseless against an adult woman, and began shaking her with such brutal force that the child's head swayed violently back and forth like a rag doll. The aggression didn't stop there. Lindsay squeezed Hannah with enough force to leave marks, lifted her from the ground, and continued shaking her with even more violence. Finally, in an act of uncontrolled fury, she literally threw the child onto the hard concrete floor of the garage. The force of this final impact was medically determined to be equivalent to the trauma of a fall from a second floor. Hannah's small body simply couldn't withstand such violence. Her delicate brain was shaken inside her skull with enough force to cause irreversible and fatal damage. At exactly 7 in the morning, Lindsay tried to call Jason, but he couldn't answer immediately. He called back within a minute, but by this point, Hannah's fate was already sealed. At 7:02 minutes, Lindsay dialed the emergency number 911, and her voice was recorded for posterity. In the recording of this call, which would later be played before a horrified jury, we can hear a woman apparently desperate crying on the phone, begging paramedics to hurry to save a little girl who had simply lost consciousness without explanation. The terrible irony is that this same woman had just shaken a 3-year-old child with enough violence to completely destroy her brain, only minutes before making this supposedly concerned call. When first responders arrived at Lindsay's house, they found a scene that would remain etched in their memories forever. Little Hannah was unconscious on the living room couch, her small body limp and fragile. Her breathing was dangerously shallow and irregular, a clear sign that something was terribly wrong. Her eyes were moving, but in an uncoordinated and purposeless manner, another medical indicator of severe brain trauma. Even more alarming, scattered across her small body were multiple bruises in various stages of healing, on her face, on her chest, under her chin, and in other places that would only become visible during more detailed medical examination. Firefighter Evan Reedy, who was the first professional to arrive at the scene, immediately recognized they were dealing with an extremely serious medical emergency. His experience and training told him the child was in imminent mortal danger. He quickly prepared Hannah for emergency transport, instinctively knowing that every second lost could be the difference between life and death. At Fort Hamilton Hospital, Dr. Ann Nguyen examined Hannah and saw something that made her shudder. Professionally, the child presented multiple bruises on various parts of her body. Her pupils weren't reacting adequately to light, an extremely worrying neurological sign, and there was clear evidence of bleeding behind her eyes. Most critically, Hannah couldn't breathe on her own without mechanical assistance. The doctor immediately made the decision to intubate the child, inserting a breathing tube directly into her throat, and ordered emergency air transport to Cincinnati Children's Hospital, where pediatric trauma specialists could provide more advanced care. It was at Cincinnati Children's Hospital that the medical team discovered the true and complete picture of the horror Hannah had faced. Scans and other examinations revealed she had suffered massive and devastating bleeding in her brain. so severe that her brain had literally shifted inside her skull due to swelling. Her eyes were completely filled with blood in all 3 anatomical layers, a medical condition that indicates extreme trauma. At the back of her head, doctors discovered deep and extensive bruises, some that only became visible after completely shaving her hair, others that were only discovered during more invasive procedures. Dr. Dorothy Dean, an experienced forensic pathologist who would later perform Hannah's official autopsy, described the child's injuries using a single word that summarized all the brutality of what had happened: tremendous. Hannah's small and delicate brain had suffered the type of trauma that doctors normally see only in victims of falls from great heights or high-speed automobile accidents. The force necessary to cause such devastation was so great that Dr. Dean could categorically state that a simple fall from ground level, as Lindsay had initially claimed, could never have resulted in such extensive and severe damage. During the first hours after the incident, Lindsay Parton managed to maintain a convincing performance of innocence and genuine concern. She was visibly upset and crying while talking to the emergency dispatcher, repeatedly begging for the ambulance to arrive as quickly as possible. She felt very bad yesterday, she constantly repeated, trying to establish a narrative where Hannah's bruises were the result of previous accidents, not recent violence. To anyone observing the situation superficially, Lindsay seemed genuinely shocked and concerned about the child's welfare. When Butler County detectives initially questioned Lindsay on March 8th, the first day after the incident, she firmly maintained her position of innocence. She repeatedly insisted she had done nothing wrong, and that Hannah's injuries must have resulted from falls and accidents from previous days. But investigators quickly realized something wasn't right with Lindsay's story. They had spoken extensively with medical specialists who were categorical in their assessments. Hannah's injuries, particularly the devastating brain trauma, had occurred that same morning, not days before as Lindsay claimed. The medical evidence was simply incompatible with the version of events Lindsay was trying to sell. Doctors explained that the type of brain bleeding Hannah had suffered would have resulted in immediate incapacitation. There would have been no period of several hours where she could have functioned normally before losing consciousness suddenly. Next day, March 9th, detectives called Lindsay for a second interrogation, this time armed with more detailed medical information and greater determination to get to the truth. They were prepared for a much more confrontational and direct conversation. During this second session, they confronted Lindsay with medical photographs of Hannah's bruises taken at the hospital. These images were incontestable and clearly showed patterns of injuries that couldn't have resulted from simple accidental falls. Gradually, under the relentless pressure of medical evidence and persistent questioning from detectives, Lindsay's elaborate story began to crumble piece by piece. First, she claimed Hannah had slipped and hit her head on a concrete step. When this version was questioned, she changed to a new story where she herself had fallen while holding Hannah. Subsequently, she offered a third version where maybe she had lightly shaken Hannah after a fall in an attempt to wake her up. But detectives continued pressing relentlessly, knowing the medical evidence was too convincing to accept these evasive explanations. Finally, after long hours of intense interrogation, with the truth being extracted layer by layer, the terrible reality finally emerged. "I got angry and hit her head," Lindsay finally confessed to detectives, her words being recorded for later use in court. But perhaps the most devastating and incriminating evidence against Lindsay didn't come from her confession, but from her own actions in the days preceding the crime. On March 7th, exactly 24 hours before Hannah's death, Lindsay had obsessively searched the internet about how to get rid of bruises. This wasn't a single or casual consultation. She made this specific search 5 separate times during a single day, demonstrating growing and obsessive concern with the topic. Even more incriminating, she deliberately deleted 2 of these searches from her browsing history, in an obvious attempt to cover up evidence of her actions. During the subsequent trial, Lindsay tried to explain these searches by claiming she was simply looking for natural remedies to help Hannah with bruises resulting from accidental falls, specifically mentioning essential oils and medicinal vapor. But the jury wasn't convinced by this explanation. The logical question that remained was, why would someone delete searches from their history if they were genuinely trying to help an injured child? An even more shocking and revealing moment occurred during Lindsay's first interrogation. The Detectives, following standard procedure, left her alone in the interrogation room for a few minutes, not realizing the recording system was still active and capturing audio. During these moments of supposed privacy, Lindsay was recorded saying, out loud and clearly, "I'm going to prison for the rest of my life." This happened before she had confessed anything, before detectives had shown the most damning medical evidence, and before she had been formally accused of any crime. This spontaneous statement strongly suggested that Lindsay already knew, deep down, that she was guilty of something terrible. A truly innocent person wouldn't make such an unsolicited comment, especially in a situation where she was still maintaining the facade of being a victim of circumstances. Lindsay Parton's trial began in April 2019 and extended for 10 emotionally charged days that completely divided the local community. The courtroom presented a dramatic visual division that reflected the conflicting loyalties of the case. On one side of the courtroom, Hannah's family sat united, wearing bright blue t-shirts with the touching message, "God's Angel Forever." A public demonstration of love and memory for the girl they had lost. On the other side, Lindsay's family and friends gathered, people who simply couldn't accept or believe that the woman they had known for years was capable of committing such a terrible act against a defenseless child. The prosecutors built a methodically devastating case against Lindsay. They showed the jury the complete video of her detailed confession, where she not only admitted to having attacked Hannah, but also physically demonstrated how she had done it. They played the recording of her original call to emergency services, where Jason's voice can be heard in the background desperately pleading, "Hannah, breathe. Breathe for Daddy." Perhaps even more impactful, the prosecutors presented medical photographs of Hannah's bruises, images so disturbing and painful that Lindsay was seen crying at the defense table, apparently confronted with the visual reality of what she had caused to a defenseless child. Doctor after doctor was called to testify about the terrible extent of Hannah's injuries. Dr. Young, an ophthalmology specialist, explained to the jury that the bleeding in Hannah's eyes was more extensive and severe than what he had observed even in high-speed automobile accident victims. Dr. Carr, a pediatric neurologist, detailed how Hannah's brain bleeding was so massive and devastating that the child would have immediately lost the ability to function normally. Crucially, multiple medical specialists confirmed there was no possibility of a lucid interval, a period of time where Hannah could have walked, talked, or functioned normally after suffering such injuries. The medical evidence was clear and incontestable. Whatever caused these injuries resulted in immediate and irreversible incapacitation. The defense team, led by attorney Melinda Howard, faced a practically impossible task. The medical evidence was overwhelming in its clarity. Lindsay's confessions had been recorded on video from multiple angles. The incriminating Google searches demonstrated clear premeditation. How to defend a case that seemed indefensible. The strategy Howard chose was bold and controversial. She decided to blame Jason Wess, Hannah's own father. The defense focused on a specific discrepancy in Jason's story about his activities the night before his daughter's death. Howard repeatedly emphasized that Jason had lied to police about where he had been the night of March 7th. Initially, he claimed to have gone to Walmart to buy milk, a simple and apparently innocent story. But the truth, which only emerged more than a year later, was different. Jason had spent the night taking a friend named Chris Davis home and allowing him to stay at his residence. The defense argued this discrepancy wasn't merely an innocent oversight, but evidence that Jason was hiding something significant. Why would a grieving father lie about something apparently so trivial, unless he was trying to cover up something much more serious? The defense also brought a legendary figure from the world of forensic medicine, Dr. Werner Spitz, a 92-year-old forensic pathologist who had testified in some of the most famous criminal cases in American history. Despite his advanced age, Dr. Spitz was still considered one of the ultimate authorities in determining causes of death. Dr. Spitz offered an opinion that directly contradicted the state doctor's findings. He argued that the human brain doesn't swell instantly after trauma, but requires time to develop the type of swelling observed in Hannah. Based on his analysis, he suggested the injuries could have occurred hours before the moment the prosecution alleged. This alternative medical opinion created at least some doubt about the exact timeline of events, which was crucial to the prosecution's theory that Lindsay had caused the injuries on the morning of March 8th. The most dramatic and tense moment of the entire trial came when Lindsay Parton made the risky decision to testify in her own defense. With visible tears in her eyes and a trembling voice of emotion, she solemnly swore to the jury that she had never intentionally harmed Hannah. According to her testimony, all her previous confession to police was a complete fabrication, forced by intimidating detectives who had pressured her until she said what they wanted to hear. She claimed to have felt completely overwhelmed during the interrogation and to have invented a false story to protect other people she loved. When directly questioned by her attorney about whether she had caused injuries to Hannah on March 8th, Lindsay firmly responded that she had not. The same when asked about March 6th and 7th. When asked why she had confessed to police, she explained that she wanted to protect everyone around her. According to her new version of events, the truth about what happened to Hannah on the morning of March 8th was exactly what she had said in her first interview with police. They had simply entered the house together, and Hannah had inexplicably lost consciousness without any external intervention. But the prosecutors were completely prepared for this moment. Under relentless cross-examination, they confronted Lindsay with a fact that was simply undeniable and devastating to her new narrative. During her original confession to police, Lindsay hadn't simply verbally admitted to attacking Hannah. She had physically demonstrated exactly how she had done it, showing the specific movements, the types of blows, the way she had shaken the child. No one had suggested these specific actions to her. No one had coached or directed her movements. How could she have demonstrated with such precision actions she claimed never to have committed? How could she have shown such specific details of something that supposedly never happened? Even more devastating to her credibility, prosecutors highlighted something that revealed much about Lindsay's mindset. During her confession, she had basically admitted that she considered it normal and acceptable to hit a 3-year-old child. She had expressed the belief that Hannah's father would approve of such discipline. This revelation painted a disturbing portrait of a woman who fundamentally didn't understand appropriate boundaries in childcare. Someone who saw physical violence against a small child as normal and justifiable behavior. After 12 intense and emotionally exhausting hours of deliberation, during which the jury carefully examined every piece of evidence and every detail of testimony, they finally returned to the courtroom on the evening of April 12, 2019. The verdict they announced resonated through the silent courtroom like thunder, guilty on all charges. Lindsay Parton was formally found guilty of murder, involuntary manslaughter, and 4 separate charges of child endangering. The court clerk read each verdict in a solemn and clear manner. On the first 4 charges of child endangering, the jury pronounced a verdict of guilty. On the charge of involuntary manslaughter, again guilty. And on the most serious charge of murder, the final decision was the same, guilty. On May 9, 2019, Judge Greg Stevens pronounced the sentence that would seal Lindsay's fate for the coming decades. He sentenced her to life, in prison, with possibility of parole only after 18 years of incarceration. During the sentencing hearing, Hannah's family had the opportunity to directly confront Lindsay with the devastating impact of her actions. Jason Wess, speaking as a destroyed father, expressed his anger and pain in a raw and emotional manner, describing Hannah as his brave, intelligent, loving, caring, adventurous, beautiful, strong, and charismatic daughter who had been lost forever. Jason declared that the family had been robbed of an entire lifetime with Hannah, that there would be no more birthday parties for her, and that the girl would remain forever 3 years old in their memories. He expressed that he couldn't even begin to describe the anger he felt, hoping Lindsay would receive the maximum punishment possible and never leave prison for what she had done to his daughter. Even after the verdict and sentence, Lindsay's supporters continued to proclaim her innocence. Family members and close friends expressed total disbelief about Lindsay's capacity to commit such an act, claiming to have known her their entire lives and never having seen violent or aggressive behavior toward children. Today, Lindsay Parton, now 43 years old, is serving her sentence at Dayton Correctional Institution. She participates in rehabilitation programs, including music therapy and parenting classes, and is training to serve as a mentor for other inmates. Her nearest possible date for parole is 2037. The most painful aspect of Lindsay's current situation is that she hasn't seen her 2 biological daughters since her conviction. In letters written from prison, she expressed deep longing wanting her daughters to know that she thought about them every minute of every day and loved them infinitely. Lindsay's family spent more than $75,000 on legal fees, filing appeals at every possible level of the judicial system. Every appeal was systematically denied. In March 2021, the Ohio Supreme Court refused to hear the case, effectively exhausting all legal options available to Lindsay. For Hannah's family, although legal justice had been served, the emotional pain remains a constant presence in their lives. Jason West channeled his pain toward a greater cause, founding the Hannah Strong Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated specifically to helping children who are victims of abuse. The foundation's goal is ambitious and moving: to raise $785,000 to create a specialized camp where children who have suffered trauma can find healing and support. But for a man who lost his beloved daughter, no amount of money or public recognition can fill the void left by Hannah. The family continues to maintain a painful but meaningful tradition. They regularly visit Hannah's grave at Rest Haven Memorial Park. Instead of embracing a living and vibrant child, they lie on the cold ground and embrace a headstone, a ritual that represents both eternal love and inconsolable loss. Although the legal system has pronounced its final verdict, the Hannah Wesi case continues to raise fundamental and concerning questions about childcare supervision in our society. Lindsay operated a home daycare completely without a license, without any governmental or professional supervision. No one had verified her actual qualifications beyond what she claimed. No one regularly monitored the safety and welfare of children in her home. There were no established protocols to detect signs of danger or abuse. The system had fundamentally failed to protect the most vulnerable children. The case also raises disturbing questions about recognizing warning signs. Hannah's grandfather had noticed repeated bruises and heard the girl herself mention problems with her caregiver. Why didn't these clues lead to a deeper investigation? How can our society be better trained to recognize and respond to danger signals? Medical questions also remain a subject of debate among specialists. All medical professionals who testified for the prosecution categorically stated that such severe injuries could be inflicted in a matter of seconds. But some people in the medical community still express doubts about specific aspects of the investigation. Did police really investigate all possibilities adequately and completely? Or did they focus on Lindsay as a suspect too quickly? These questions will probably never be completely resolved, but continue to be debated in professional circles. Hannah Jade Wesi lived only 3 years and 2 months in this world, but her story touched and impacted thousands of people across the country. A child who began her life heroically fighting chemical dependency, who spent her first critical months in a hospital fighting for survival, who withstood housing instability and poverty, absolutely deserved to grow up, laugh, love, and live a full life. Instead, she tragically became a victim of the same type of violence from which her loving father was desperately trying to protect her. Her death represents not only a family tragedy, but a systemic failure of multiple institutions that should have functioned as safety nets. Hannah's tragedy serves as a somber and urgent reminder that children are indisputably the most vulnerable among us. They depend completely on the adults around them not only for love, nourishment, and basic care, but also for active protection against those who might harm them. In Hannah's specific case, the protection system failed at multiple critical levels. From the lack of adequate regulation of home daycares, to the collective failure to recognize and appropriately respond to evident signs of growing danger. But perhaps the most important and lasting lesson from Hannah's story is the fundamental affirmation that every child, regardless of their birth circumstances or family background, deserves unconditional protection and loving care. Hannah, born to a mother struggling with chemical dependency and raised by a single father facing economic difficulties, was as precious and valuable as any other child in any other family. Her death shouldn't have occurred under any circumstances, and her memory deserves to be preserved not only as that of a tragic victim, but as that of a brave little warrior who overcame unimaginable obstacles before her life was brutally interrupted. Today, while Lindsay Parton serves her prison sentence and Hannah's family continues to navigate through their grief, the story continues to serve as an urgent call to action. It reminds us of the precious fragility of childhood and the solemn responsibility we all share to protect the most vulnerable and defenseless among us. Little Hannah may have left this world too soon, but her story continues to inspire changes in child protection laws, training for child care professionals, and public awareness about danger signs that all children deserve to have recognized and addressed. In her memory, we must commit to creating a world where no child faces what Hannah faced, where every child can grow up in safety, love, and protection, exactly as Hannah deserved to have grown up. We've reached the end of this devastating but important story to tell. If you made it this far, please leave your like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming cases. Your opinion is fundamental to us. Leave in the comments what case you'd like to see analyzed next week. Together, we continue bringing light to stories that need to be told. See you next time.